Hey everybody, welcome to the presentation. I'm going to go ahead, and it's kind of ironic that this is on media and technology because I'm going to be switching back and forth into media and technology. As you can see, I am signed into my Microsoft 360 account through my work, which is Johns Hopkins University. So today we are going to be talking about let's go back to the correct slide. See, media and technology, it's already started. Hold on one second, everyone. There it is. Okay. So I'll make sure my slides are forwarding. Great. We're going to be talking about adjunctive media and technology in counseling practice, emerging adults and beyond. And in the room with me, I have Matt, and I'm going to be looking over at him and talking to him as well as I present. So we will have some interaction on and also, I'm going to do a couple of tools, and if you want, go ahead and just play along at home, and it could be a fun, hopefully, presentation. So I want to talk a little bit about my background. So I've been a professional counselor for almost 20 years. I started out by working with emerging adults in residential treatment in Denver, Colorado. Then my middle part of my career was in the employee assistance professional field. So I worked with federal agencies. I worked with the state. The city and county of Denver was one of my places. And after that, I got into what's called a peer diversion program. So I worked for the state of Colorado, helping impaired professionals who are like psychologists, social workers, dentists, nurses, things like that. And then most recently, I've been in the college counseling space. I've been at the University of North Texas at Dallas, which was the only public university in the city and kind of the south end of the city. So I got to work with an incredibly diverse student population, which was a pleasure. After that, I worked at the George Washington University in Washington, D.C., and worked with undergraduates, graduates, but also was the liaison to the medical school. And that kind of got me into working with medical schools. As you can see, my journey is a meandering stream. Then I went to Penn State College of Medicine, was there for a while. And finally, and most recently, I'm at Johns Hopkins University. I work in the DC office, but primarily my clients are in Baltimore. And I work with the graduate student populations. Most recently, I will start to work with the undergraduates as well. A joy to be back with emerging adulthood, which is also really interesting because younger and younger students, especially in the gifted and talented space, are going to university. So that will mean I will be working with the entire lifespan. We're talking 15, 16-year-olds, and then my oldest client right now is in their 60s. So I think one thing that's interesting is that we do use an EAP approach. It's probably unique amongst college counseling and graduate school counseling. So that's something just to be of note. So I'm trained in brief therapy, solution focused, but primarily I really like long-term counseling. And I have a private practice as well, and I'm involved in a number of different projects. Additionally, I'm a graduate student at Oregon State University. I'm in my final, hopefully, fingers crossed, quarter there, and will defend in December. My research interests are ruptures and repairs in the counseling relationship using a methodology called corpus linguistics. So it's a quantitative method using things like log likelihood to look at language and find out the psychological constructs behind language so that we can more easily train people to identify ruptures and to tend to them in the counseling session. So hopefully that line of research will keep going. Sorry, I'm talking so much. This is just a lot of information. Lastly, I would just mention that I am really involved with the American College Counseling Association. I have a really cool project going on right now. If I have time, I might show a clip of it. I'm interviewing different clinicians around the US who identify as having a marginalized identity and getting their lived experience being in the counseling center. And I have 2 videos. I'm using a professional production company, and hopefully this will become a revenue stream for the American College Counseling Association. So if you want, I'll put my information in here if you want connections to those videos to watch clinicians. If you have students that maybe are folks that are looking to get into college counseling, this is a great way, especially if they have marginalized intersecting identities. I think we really need more clinicians of colors in universities and counseling centers. So that's something to check out. So here's our agenda. Sorry, we always should do the agenda. And I'm actually going to stop for a second and just talk to Matt a little bit and just ask him a bit more about his career. And I'm curious, Matt, like you said that you're at the University of Pennsylvania in Indiana. Is that right? Or Indiana at Pennsylvania? Yeah. And it sounds like you really have an interest in emerging adults. And I'd just love to hear a little bit more about kind of where that comes from and yeah, that kind of stuff.
I remember being, long story short, I remember being 18 years old on the college campus. I knew that I didn't know anything. Like, how am I supposed to choose my life and pick a major right now? I ended up in business major in accounting, and then I said, this is boring. I can't do this. I eventually got into counseling. I said, I want to work with those who were like me in that way, who just didn't know what to do, be that kind of sort of you're kind of lost when you're an adult. Then, I went to my master's program. They had criminal mental health and school counseling. I said, well, I really want to do college. And they said, well, probably school, and you can do that. So that's how I got into the school counseling role. Of course, I worked as a school counselor. Then I got my doc program. And I worked emerging global theory, which I hear from that. So, this is exactly how I felt when I was that age. Then I based my dissertation on emerging adulthood. And one of my professors in dissertation chair was his dissertation and his research kind of focused on emerging adulthood as well. So it's really nice to connect with him in my program. Now that faculty are kind of basing on the research on emerging adulthood theory, which I really like, but I don't have criticisms. But so yeah, it's kind of long story, but it's kind of how I got really love the emerging adulthood.
Awesome. And I'm wondering, did your dissertation get published, or do you have anything that's published?
There's a couple things in this case. They're in the works. They're submitted. It's been like 6 months just waiting to hear back. So
okay, awesome. They really do. They really do. I appreciate that. Thank you. Is there anything specifically that you want me to focus on today? I have a lot of things prepped, but want to make sure that I customize it to whatever would be helpful as well. Okay, awesome. Thanks, Matt. And yeah, and I really, I'm weird because I like technology, but I'm not always good at it. So I think it's important to remember that some of this stuff is scary. And really, when COVID happened, we were all kind of thrust into technology all of a sudden. And I just remember those early days. And at Johns Hopkins, where I work, they love tools. So I have Microsoft Teams, I have DoxyMe, I have Zoom. And so there's just like they all have little slight differences. And it's really interesting because like Microsoft Teams will then customize for you. So it's just been a really interesting journey on trying things and failing. I still feel like I'm a little bit scarred from those first few months doing all telehealth and having connectivity issues, my students having connectivity issues. Trying to join with people online has been a real challenge at times. And so I actually had my first day back in the office this week, and I have my first face-to-face next week. So I'm a little nervous. So I think this has been a really interesting time to talk about technology, and maybe it's important to just be open and honest that it's not always easy. It takes a lot of getting used to, and you don't have to do it. There are still counseling, I'm sure, counselor trainees and also patients or clients, however you call them, who prefer face-to-face. And I think we have to honor that as well. But I think also there's some awesome opportunities to try new things. And I've just gotten really creative with it. And hopefully some of the ideas I share today will be helpful. So I talked about I'm going to show just one recent publication that's in the works in case you all, I guess when you're you're doing a presentation, you have to establish some credibility. So here's my credibility. Hopefully it's credible. So here's a manuscript that I have accepted, and I've done 2 rounds of edits. Fingers crossed there won't be another one. This is media and technology in counseling and emerging practices in response to this. And this is my colleague at Technotherapy, and I'll explain who they are a little bit later. And this is the Journal of Counseling Practices. the Journal of Counseling, Research, and Practice. And this is the flagship journal for the Mississippi Counseling Association. So I've actually just a plug, they're an amazing journal to work with. I've not had such a good experience with any other journal. The editor talks to me regularly. I felt like really encouraging. So if you're thinking about maybe a smaller journal that you want to submit to, I would really recommend this. So hopefully this will be published, look for it. And if you want, please email me and I'll put my email in the chat and you all can get that from me as well. And I just want to check my Zoom to make sure. Okay, so I'm not sharing my screen. So I need to do that. Okay, so I'm gonna go back here. 1 second, so that's a lot of talking. But let's see here. So I need to make sure I go here first and go here. Sorry for the delay, everyone. So click here. Okay, so I need to, I think, present first, then exit, escape, exit full screen. Okay, so I have to go the other way. Zoom meeting, and then, okay, share screen. This is the way I gotta go. Okay, and what I might just leave it in slide mode because I think it'll be a little bit easier. Okay, so I want to talk through some of the things that we use. Let's see, we went through here. Okay. Somehow that got here. Let's go here. Okay, so there's all these different types of programs. So we seem to have these collections. And one is kind of just like regular psycho ed. And so there's a lot of module-based psycho ed. And you can get a lot of these just on, say, your iPhone. But there are these module-based programs that counseling centers can purchase. And here are some of the most interesting ones that are available. And WellTrack I have used. I used it at Penn State College of Medicine and at George Washington University. One of the things with all of these different module-based therapy apps is that the research suggests that people don't go through them all the way. So they'll go to 1, 2, or 3. They're really expensive and they're priced per student generally. There are some discounts, for example, Tau, if you ask them, say, hey, we will promote your tool on our website, they might give you a discount. They'll also give you multiple year discounts. So when I was at George Washington University, my task was to vet all of these different tools. And so the other one, Silver Cloud here, I'm actually not gonna click on it, but this is the one that we have at Johns Hopkins. And I, as a very media and technology savvy therapist, I have all of my students use Silver Cloud. Now, the way I frame it to them is, hey, this is a CBT-based app. You know, a lot of the students I serve are medical students or PhD students, and they like science. So I often will give them, some efficacy studies on CBT, and I'll say, like, this is a common language that we can use together. Silver Cloud is great because the videos are really short. They have 2-minute videos, and then they have worksheets. And once you complete all 8 of the modules, which usually take about 10 minutes, it will continually email you to practice the CBT skills. So I like that piece as well. One of the downsides of Silver Cloud is you only get to choose one track. There's anxiety, depression, stress, I think like social anxiety or something like that, but you only get to do one, and I'm not sure why. Live to Learn, I think by far is the savviest in terms of video quality and the amount of money put into that. It is very expensive. It is the most expensive, I think, by a couple of dollars a student. WellTrack is probably the least expensive, but I don't want to rip on the company or anything like that, but they've been a little bit tough to get a hold of at times. And I think they are also going to integrate with some of these bigger companies that I'll talk about later. So I'm not sure if they're going to be a standalone very long. They also are a bit limited. They have 3 tracks and I think about 4 to 6 modules. It's not bad. So if it's something that you can afford, it could be good. Last is Tau, and Tau was the first to this space, and they're pretty good. I like them a lot because they also have the ability for you as a therapist to work with your client through the app. So you can give homework, you can review homework together. Additionally, they have support groups. So every week you can meet with the TAO groups, and they have large universities, small universities, international universities. And it's really just kind of a hub where you can discuss ideas and talk through things. And they bring in pretty talented folks to help facilitate or maybe explain a different way that you can use TAO. I've also used WellTrack as a group. So what I do is I have all my students come in a room, we watch one of the modules, we do the work together, and that's had some success in my opinion. But I think you can kind of play with these things. And Matt, I wanted to see if you have any questions about these types of things.
No, it's cool. The only one I've heard about, and I don't know, I'm trying to place where I have is Learn to Live. Is that the most popular?
Yeah, I see. That's so funny because in my world, I think that's the least popular. But yeah, I mean, again, like when I saw like terms of like the quality, I think that one's the highest. So it'll be interesting to see what else comes out. And there's also a couple of other things I haven't mentioned. There's You at College, and that's a really interesting one that started in Denver, and it is a kind of undercover mental health. And so what it is it's a huge hub that has all the resources at, say, CSU is where they started it. So you have your career development, how to get along with your roommate, all of these things, and you work modules, and it's smart, it's AI driven, so it sends you videos and things like that, YouTube videos, and then it brings you to the counseling center in like some of these different spaces. So that's another really big one that's kind of growing fast. I'm trying to think who else is in the college space. And then I'll talk about a couple other here coming up as well. So let's go to the next slide, if I can get this to go. Okay. So we went through that. Okay, so let's talk about mental health apps. And one thing I would recommend here, especially working with, master student counselors or, emerging adults, is I like to ask them because they know what they like, right? For instance, some of these apps, like Waking Up is my favorite, 10% is good, but that might be better for somebody at a different stage in development. They're really kind of heady. Maybe if you're working with medical students, they'll like it. But some of my students have said to me, Justin, this stuff is just too long and too heady. So there's other apps that I haven't mentioned today here that are really kind of basic meditation apps. And I'm also working on a piece with a company. We're going to rank all the apps. We're going to say which ones are multiculturally competent, which ones are best for usability. And then we're going to kind of look at each of the spaces. And then we're going to kind of put A, B, C rating. We haven't seen that done yet. And so I will also, if you keep in contact with me, I can show you that article when I get that, or it's not an article, it's just kind of like a blog post. Any apps, Matt, that you like or that you found helpful to share with your master's counseling students or clients that you have, things like that?
Yeah, I've actually used Headspace before. It's a really simple app that you can on the use it in the school counseling setting. And it's cool because they would kind of tracks when they used it, so they could say like they would kind of say, "Look at it," and they would just say, "Okay," you can see what they said doing it, how they liked it. They really liked it. I've never used any of the other ones there, but I have used Headspace, and the teenagers I've worked with really liked it.
Yeah, so it's interesting, like 10% Happier and Headspace were free for mental health providers and school teachers and medical care professionals. So that was awesome. Both of them have gone back to pay, which is unfortunate, but that's kind of how I got geeked out on them a little bit. And then Calm, we give away at Hopkins, so all of our students have access. And that's really interesting because I love their master classes. And so if you go on the desktop version, there's a one on sleep that's incredible. It's like 8 sessions, and they really talk about how you can calculate your own circadian rhythms to know how much sleep you need. So it's a really cool one. And then we have Tara Branch on there as well, doing a master class on loving kindness meditation, which is really cool. And the thing that they love the most are the sleep stories. This thing has been a huge hit. And so a lot of our students not only will use the breathing exercises in Calm, but they have like Matthew McConaughey reading sleep stories. And so everyone's got their favorite one. And that's been a huge win. And I'm a huge sleep person. I know that there's a strong bi-directional relationship between sleep and mental health. If you're not sleeping, your mental health's worth, your mental health's worth. you're not sleeping. And so those can get into this funky loop. To get them out of that can be really hard. So I talk sleep hygiene constantly. So the Calm Masterclass is a good way to hit that. Another trick that I've learned is having my students more and more have this. You can get free sleep apps on your phone, or I have them use their iPhone. That's been a huge win. And so what you can do is go online and just look up what's normal sleep architecture. And so what I do with my students is I share my screen with them, and then they pull up their iPhone and they put it up right up to the screen, and we look and we talk through them. What's deep sleep? What's not deep sleep? What could we try different? And that's been a huge win in a way that I check in and connect with my clients as well. Next, I wanted to talk a little bit about, and I was going to check with you, Matt, any other kind of apps or things that, one other thing that I think is really helpful are the mood tracking apps. So there's one called Daylio, Daylio. That one has been a huge one for my clients, because they'll say, often when I'm doing therapy with my clients, I'll be like, hey, here's what I want you to do for this week. Let's do a mood journal, right? Like if you notice your mood in certain times, and that app is really easy. You can click on it, you can rank it, and then you can put like a sentence or two. So that's a way I can often help them identify hot thoughts, internalized narratives, self-limiting beliefs in the app. So that can be cool. I don't know, fortunately or unfortunately, have really found 3 kind of expertise recently, OCD, ADHD, and ASD. So autism, ADHD, and OCD are kind of my 3 wheelhouses now. And I think that's probably because I work with such gifted and talented community. But this space is blowing up with things to do. I'll just highlight a few. I won't go too in it. I talked about Daylio. Brilly is a really cool app. So Brilly helps anyone that struggles with executive functioning to help break down their tasks in a day. So we know with one of the hardest things about somebody who's neuroatypical, I like to use that term more than these actual diagnoses, is that they struggle to get going in the morning. So having a way to break down or to externalize their executive functioning so they can see it is super effective. So that's one that I use. Oh, and these sleep apps are incredible. So my favorite one, I can't remember if it's called Barcode Alarm. And I think I have it up here. I'm actually not going to show it. So if you Google Barcode Alarm, what you can do is go around your house and set barcodes, okay? So when your alarm goes off, you can only go and turn it off if you scan the barcode. And so a lot of my young folks who struggle with hyposomnia, trying to get up in the morning, will have them turn this alarm on. They have to go find it. Yep. And then I have them take their meds. So I'll have them take their stimulants and get that going. They can go back to sleep, and then we set it again. So that's one of the tricks that we've used that's been pretty effective. It doesn't always work. Folks that are neuroatypical, we have good days and bads, but those are really good. Some other things that I use a ton with my neuroatypical folks, and actually part of my own journey is realizing that I'm neuroatypical and that I actually have ADHD. So this stuff is really great because I get to teach it and I get to learn about my own brain, which is awesome. But I love the video series, How to ADHD. It's incredible. If you're somebody that's not an expert in ADHD, you can just use these videos and they talk about every topic. It started as a TED Talk and it's become a sensation. So check it out. If you have people that might be neuroatypical in the spectrum, this one, Ask an Autistic, is another great channel that kind of helps really, because when you hear patients talk about it or clients talk about ADHD and what the lived experience of being autistic is like, that is a game changer, because then they can really relate. Because often we talk in these very kind of conceptual ways, and they don't really understand what that is. And then on my way down last night, I drove from Washington, D.C. I listened to my favorite new podcast, ADHD Rewired. And I encourage folks that are clinicians that are working with emerging adults or even later adults is just open up your app store and just put in the diagnosis, and you will find so much content. I think this is one of the most insane times to be alive because there's so much good content and research out there, and it's so accessible. So this is one where you could just assign an episode each week. I try to stay ahead of it. Another one that I really love is Dr. Lori Santos out of Yale has this happiness lab. And so for my students that are struggling with existential happiness, I have them go through her first 3 seasons. They're only about 30 to 40 minutes because we know attention sometimes is a struggle with some of our students. And these are really engaging episodes. So check that out as well. I'm going to go down a little bit more here. I think I talked about Dalio, Brilli. Yep, got all those. Now let's talk a bit about teletherapy tools. So the ones that a lot of private practitioners use is DoxyMe, and that's very much therapy specific. Have you heard of DoxyMe before, Matt? Okay, so one of the unique things about DoxyMe is that, like, and Zoom has this now, it's called the waiting room, but DoxyMe does have like a waiting room that looks like a therapy space, I guess. So that's cool. I don't know, but you'll know and you can get a free account to start. And then if you want more bells and whistles, you can go to a higher level deal. So that's a great one if you've got students who are future counselors or counselor educators who have a private practice. It's free, it's easy to use, as long as your internet connectivity. Before your session, you can send an email to your client letting them know this is the link, it's a reminder, those sort of things. Microsoft Teams, I think I've not heard much in terms of people using it for therapy, but it's maybe good in institutions like Hopkins where we all use Teams. So I do a ton of like CISDs, unfortunately, recently. For example, we had a suicide of a medical student about a month ago, and this is a great tool to use for just doing a debriefing group. I had subscribed to the Mitchell model, so that is the idea that we talk about intellectually talk about the event, we talk about the effect, the emotion effect, and then we kind of talk about tools, resources, action steps, coping tools. And I use this kind of like bell-shaped curve usually to show that. But Microsoft Teams has been a good one for that because the folks at Hopkins are really used to using Teams. But I have not seen people use that for therapy. Have you, Matt, have you ever heard of that? Anyone using Teams for counseling? No, okay. And then last, Zoom. And so we have the big daddy at Hopkins called JHU Enterprise Zoom. So, you know, again, one just caution is there's lots of great trainings on teletherapy, and a lot of them were free during the pandemic. I'm not sure if they are now. I went on an 8-hour one from APA. It was like raining free CEUs for like a year. It was amazing. I think I hoarded tons of them for this licensure cycle. But anyway, there's a lot of great trainings out there. And one thing to really think about from the ethical and legal perspective is, are you HIPAA compliant? How are your records stored? You know, are you recording your sessions? And so Hopkins does not allow me to record my sessions or transcribe them. So I can use it because it is HIPAA compliant. But initially, like, there were some struggles, right? Like sometimes you get into a session and somebody else drops in your Zoom room. That's called like Zoom bombing, right? And you know, there was a question for a time is like, can you see if somebody else is in the room if your client's in there? And initially I thought maybe they could. Apparently you can't. But these are all the kind of questions you want to be asking about your tools to make sure that it's ethical. And I'm curious, Matt, any questions, concerns, or things that you've heard using teletherapy and maybe teaching? I imagine you had to do some teaching online as well.
Going in my second year, faculty institution, my whole first year was just there's an American thought so it's kind of interesting. But the Zoom bombing, I heard horrible stories. It was a conference, and I can't remember if it was. I think it was someone in the Midwest, maybe it was CS or something, but someone Zoom bombed it. I'm not going to do appropriate things. And it's just so I think I believe Zoom has waiting rooms where you could, so for telehealth, it's really applicable because you can just put someone in the waiting, and if anyone pops in, they're in the waiting room, you know, it's something that session with my client, and no one else is coming, you know. So I think that's kind of, that's a pretty cool one.
Yeah, Matt, you bring up a really good point. Like I set up my waiting room really well, and I actually, because I'm running behind most days, I message my next client and say, hey, be there in 5. And I think the culture has gotten so that my clients know that I'm always back to back to back. So the client that I'm talking to knows, I'll go like, hey, can you give me a second? Let's schedule for the next session. I jump into my Zoom chat room, boom, boom. Hey, I'm gonna be there in 5 minutes. So for them, it gets a message. they feel like I'm coming, those sorts of things. One challenge is I always have to remember to switch it back. Like if you're sharing in session, it won't go to them if you don't choose from everyone to back to the person. So that's been some of the hiccups.
That's sort of a convenience that we get through this in person in an office setting.
Yes, yes.
You don't know who's in the waiting room. So, really, you just have to, they're running late, they would have patience. So it's not
Yeah. No, I think that's a huge one as well. So I wanted to just show one quick thing here. So, oh yeah, just a couple things that I do on Zoom a lot. I share my screen, particularly because at Hopkins, we have around 40,000 students. We have a campus in Beijing, in China, in Italy, and our Flex MBA has clients in every part of the world. So I do consults for mental health all over the world. This week I did India, Thailand, Sub-Saharan Africa. I've done Dubai last week. So I do all these different areas, right? And what I often do as a way to connect with my clients, I don't know if there's any research on this. If you want to do the research on this, it'd be great. I always pull up where they are on the screen and I share it with them. And I'm like, hey, so are you here, this part of the country? I mean, I'm not like looking for their personal address, good boundaries as always, but it's often a way to connect, to discuss, to broach difference. I'm lucky enough to be at Hopkins where we have Dr. Dave Vines, who's kind of the broaching wizard, and she did a training with us. So really being able to talk about my intersecting identities, maybe, where my culture is, their culture is, and really inviting that conversation around culture. So I think that's a great way. So I encourage you to share your screen. I also have an undergraduate in my private practice who was studying abroad in Europe. And that was one way for us to connect. Her telling me about, oh, I'm going to see the Harry Potter exhibit and I am in this part of London. So we just pulled up the map and she walked me along where she walked, where she went, kind of a way for me to help connect and understand deeper. So I'd say share your screen. Another thing that I find really helpful is the show and tell. One of the things that clients cannot do, and this maybe Matt talks to your advantages of Zoom, is that you can see the person's face, right? It's maybe not as good affectively as like in person, but you can often see the space that they're in, right? And that has good and bad, right? Like, so, but you can often have them share something, maybe an animal. And I actually encourage clinicians not to use virtual backgrounds because I feel like it makes you more human and it can feel kind of robotic. And I know that's a discussion of boundaries and what you're comfortable with, but I find that if I'm able to share a bit of my space with them, it can make them feel more comfortable as well. Lastly, I'm going to talk just briefly a word on confidentiality. This has been tough, okay? I've had clients take sessions in their car with their significant others. I've had a client take a session in the liquor store while they were shopping for liquor. I've had a client take a session in the barbershop getting a haircut. I've had, and this is not, I mean, this is hard, right? Some of this is a social justice issue. One of my medical students, I just had to do sessions in front of his parents in their 1-bedroom apartment in Manhattan. That's just how it went. There was nothing else we could do. We put in headphones. I said, just be careful. We did the best we could. We used chat a lot. Also, it's good when you're having a potential domestic violence situation. Often my clients will chat with me and tell me my person's in the room. Let's not talk about this. So really having those kind of conversations. And finally, the most humorous of mine, I don't know, was one of my young people was taking a session in another small apartment in New York, and significant other came in the room and changed in the background. I didn't know what to do. I just kind of froze. Luckily, all I could see was changing of the shirt, and then kissed client on head and walked out. Had no idea was in the apartment. So really making sure that you, as you get on these types of teletherapy tools, you're clear about the expectations. At Hopkins, we just made a change this week to say, okay, in our disclosure form, it clearly states that you need to be in a confidential space. If you cannot do that, then we need to think about rescheduling or coming in face to face. And it's been a weird week, right? Like we finally are going back to person. I heard today that Charlotte has a mask mandate coming today. I heard that we had one 2 days ago. So I have a client coming in on Monday, but we're both going to be wearing masks, and the person preferred that. So just, it's an interesting time. We're moving fast, lots of stuff. So sorry about all these words. I wanted to show one quick intervention really quickly here. I'm going to stop sharing and share again because I know that you won't be able to watch it if I don't. So stop share. I'm going to go here.
I like what you said about some background. cool that, there also, Zoom also has an option where some people can blur the background. So
Yes.
but I think as soon as you see that, when we want our clients to be open and transparent to us, and as soon as we just come and ask, but we're not going to do the same, and it automatically sets this tone that how are we supposed to expect that from that? It almost puts okay, I'm not getting anything in return, so how can I? So I really like that idea. I think that's a really important one.
Yeah, and it's almost like a power differential, right? Like if you have, like for me, like, I don't know, Hopkins is an interesting place. So like, if I do use it, like for instance, my Google Meets or the other one that I mentioned earlier. So I have that, but for them, it can feel like, oh, there's Justin and there's the institution. There's the whiteness of power differential, the house of medicine. I can represent that. So I think if I can bring that down, it takes away, because I'm a very humanistic oriented counselor, right? I really want to understand my client's lived experience. And so I don't want them to have barriers like Justin is part of the institution. So I think that can be, but yeah, it's interesting you mentioned the blur. I hadn't seen that until this week. And one of my clients used it and showed me their animal, but it was blurry, which was hilarious. So I don't know. So I'm going to show you a little bit of, so I use, this might be really familiar to you, Matt. I found that career counseling interventions and the Howl card sort is one of the coolest tools I use in terms of connecting with clients. And these are my medical students and my biomedical engineering students. I really feel like Freud was, I'm not a huge dynamic person, but was on to something when he talked a lot about that we can't just separate career or vocation from psychology, right? There seem to be really intertwined. And so in my program at Oregon State, we take a narrative constructivist approach, Dr. Savickas' approach to career counseling. So it's more of a interactive, collaborative, instead of like, hey, take this assessment, Holland, or some of these strong interest inventory. We really try to make that into letting the client tell their story and things like that. So I'm going to share just a little bit of an intervention that I did last week. Hopefully this can be of help if I can pull this off. Okay, I'm sharing it. Okay, so I think you guys can all see this. I have to be careful here for confidentiality. I do have a release to show this video from my client, but I'm not going to show his face just to keep confidentiality. Okay, and I always have to remember with supervision assist, they're in an order, and which one is the first. Okay, so there we go. End of first list. Okay. So this is cool. So this technology is called supervision assist, and I like it because another thing that I will use this for is if I've done a session and this client is an example, he will want to watch his session back with me. So sometimes we'll go back and watch a previous session to look at ideas, and particularly with the neuroatypical crew, having common in our world is we have an ADHD coach, and that's one of the things that she does a lot. Ellen's fantastic. She will have all their sessions recorded and sent to them. So anything that they have talked about, because when we think about ADHD, we know that one of the biggest problems is short-term memory or executive function or working memory. So often they don't remember, like myself, I don't remember. So having it recorded is good. And so this client often will have me go back and we will use supervision assist to watch a session because I can't at Hopkins give him the transcripts. Again, thinking about HIPAA protected versus that's the thing that ADHD coaches and autism coaches, I hate the word autistic, neuroatypical coaches often don't have those restrictions so they can tape and give tools. I think that can be helpful. So I'm going to show you just a bit of using the card sort that I did this week. And I'll kind of talk through it just a little bit as I show it. So make sure no one, okay, so it's just me. And okay, so one thing you have to remember in supervision assist, I'm gonna do a stop share and a reshare. For those of you guys that use Zoom, you always have to do the share sound and the optimization of video or you will get no volume. I would have showed you something, you'd have been like, what? So here we go. It makes sense because I think, and you probably can't hear it, so what I'm seeing in your story here is that there's going to be your medicine life, there's going to be your family
it's not that important to hear what I'm
there's going to
saying.
be
It's
church
blah,
and
blah, blah.
community, and
Anyway,
those all take
I'll
time,
just talk
energy,
to
and
it
effort.
from
And
this perspective.
so what I had my client do is you're looking at an Apple computer on his side. So he created a we've got out all the cards for the career value interest inventory, if that's what it's called. And we did the top values. And then I had him get on his computer and make a table. Now, these scientists are great. This student is an MD, PhD student, so they're great with tables. So he pulled the table up. We put his top ones. My supervisor says, don't do this many because it gets too confusing. You know, maybe top 5, but we did like top 10. And then across the top, we talked about, I think you guys can see this. So I'm going to go to full screen here. We talked about the different careers. So we have academic med, missional med, and all the way from academic research. And then on the right side, he has his notes. And so he processes each session, what we've talked about. And I do a 3-session model. We do kind of like an assessment where the client talks through his favorite stories from life, his favorite characters, his people that he's looked up to that are not his family members. Second session, we do the card sort. The third session, we do delivery of feedback. But as you can see, you can be really creative and innovative. I have the client do the work because the younger people, I'm 45, I am not fast with all this stuff, but they're really fast. So I usually have them build it. And then at the end, the client can process, well, okay, here are some things, you know, they have a score. So you have both the qualitative piece on the right, the quantitative piece on the left. So this can be a really helpful tool. And so this is my new thing. I get into things as most neuroatypical people do. So most clients will be seeing this sometime soon. So something fun to try if you want. So I'm gonna stop sharing. And Matt, I'm wondering, have you seen any tools that folks use a lot or that have been helpful in your work as a counselor educator, anything in that space?
I do like the credit spot. I just actually just talked to your son the first time we were just on this, which is really cool. We talked about this class too. So I really like it. It's neat to see that. I've never saw it done over a virtual platform like that. I've always taught some physical artists. That's really cool. Seeing that in the little table chart there. Yeah, I think ever since the pandemic and everything's gone virtual, just seeing the technological the ideas that people get and really share, I think that's something really cool. I've seen it's a lot of different breakout rooms, a lot of different cool ideas, not necessarily in like a content setting, but just teaching meetings. So
Yeah, and I don't know, do you all have smart classrooms?
yeah, so our classrooms often, I don't know if this is what you're referring to, but it's maybe my TV. So sometimes we have multiple, we have a main campus, we have multiple campuses too, where closer to visitors and whatnot. But a lot of them will have, similar to what we're doing here, they'll have like a screen with TV. Some students might be in another area, and some might be in one campus, some might be in the other. I've never done that, but I've seen those set up that way. That's what you're referring to.
Yeah. I taught a class at Butler in the fall, and school counseling was my first experience with school counselors. But my college roommate, who's a counselor educator, is in class in person. We had some people not there, some people in person, and I was teaching from a huge screen from Washington, D.C. So it was amazing, and we had a lot of hiccups, but we got into a rhythm, and it started to work. But definitely, like, we are coming to the forefront of creativity on some of these things. It's nuts.
I remember switching to, I was teaching my first class at a professorship for this job. I was teaching school class in person, I switched to Zoom, and it was absurd. Like it now, as soon as you say you don't want to go back, you like Zoom, like now it's convenient. Now going in person seems absurd, you know, where it's just all that rhythm. I'm sure once they get back into that.
Yeah, I mean, I think like places like Washington, D.C., Baltimore, urban settings, like our kids don't want to travel. Like time is of the essence, right? Traffic is real. So they've told us they want to come back on some of our surveys, but we don't buy it. Because most of them just say, I'm like, hey guys, you can see me in person next week. They move on to the next topic. They're like, I'll see you on Zoom next week. Okay. But I'm going to go through, we're almost out of time. I want to make sure I just touch on a few things. So a lot of college counseling centers are really struggling, right? We know that stigma is down, health-seeking behaviors up, and we're coming out of a pandemic and people are feeling a lot. So demand for counseling services is absurd. I think it's the first time in history that I've ever seen that you can actually make money in counseling. The rates for insurance panels in DC and Baltimore are going through the roof. And college counseling is actually really struggling to find clinicians because most people are going into private practice. But the nice thing is that there's all these new companies out there. We have Timely MD, which has a Talk Now feature, which means that people can see a clinician at any time. They log in, they can see who's available, they can do a one-off session. You know, BetterHelp is getting more into the college counseling space and emerging adults. Mantra, I would say check them out. There's somebody that I do consulting work for. If you want, I put here in this link, this is an article I wrote about Telehealth 101, getting up to speed on telehealth for counseling centers. So check that out. I put it in the chat, but I don't think anybody's in the chat, so never mind. But if you go to mantrahealth.com, they have a blog post. My article is in there. MD Live is kind of a cool thing if you're in an area that's small or rural or even in a big city and you're having a hard time. Like DC and Baltimore somewhat are cash only markets because the therapists can make so much money just not accepting insurance. MD Live has clinicians in all the states and they're credentialed and they're local people. So that's another great tool. Technotherapy is the group practice that I supervise. I'm a ACS or a clinical supervisor person. So Technotherapy, we are creating a guild of clinicians that are clinician focused. Alma is another one of these big players in the space. Alma is also clinician focused. They're building their team. Alma had actual real estate, but they've now changed their model. I know their marketing outreach person happens to be in my friend group for some reason, but they are going to drop real estate. But they are, we're doing a guild model. Alma is doing something where they're still therapist focused. For example, BetterHelp and Talkspace, they're paying more and more, but they'll still grind you into the ground. Sorry, that's my own values coming in here. Please take it or leave it. But I think burnout is real and you have to be really careful with some of these online platforms. If you want any more information on that, please just email me. I will put my email address up here at the end. Some things that I also do just to get through these slides, I don't have many more, is that I love YouTube videos. These are two of the ones that I send out all the time to my students. And I also put empirical based articles with them so that my science-minded folks will read them and try this. And so I have a standard handout with articles ready to rock. So I think having canned things that you can email, I do a lot of my work between sessions. I think that's different. I think we've gotten really used to, and I do have clients that love just the traditional 50 minutes, humanistic, let's process the whole time. But I think I've gotten a lot of bang for my buck sending things between sessions. So if you're a client of mine, you're going to get emails every week from different things that I'm reading, seeing. I think that's important. Just quickly, a couple other things that I use. We saw the card short. I talked about the Apple Sleep Watch. Google Docs, this is a huge win. One thing that I do with a lot of my students is I have them walk through their process with me and share a Google Doc. And we do things like Google Draw. So we'll pull up all the drawings, we'll go through, we'll diagram their ADHD. If they have the wall of awful, which is often the thing in ADHD, we walk through it, we write together, we draw, we do that collaboratively. The feelings wheel, I know that sounds simple, but this works for my 15-year-olds all the way up to my 62-year-olds. I share this feeling wheels. We go through primary, secondary, and tertiary emotions. Finally, this is a cool survey if you get a chance to take it. This is one on Zoom fatigue. It can be a fun thing for counselor educators. You can share this with your class. They take this, they get a score, and it tells them whether they have visual fatigue, or motivational fatigue, visual fatigue, social fatigue, or general fatigue. So check that out. That's a good survey that you can use with a client. It's interactive, it's fun. It can be a good thing for your counseling classes as well. And then this is the person that I really gather the most things from, and that is Dr. Ham Weinberg. So here's an article by him, and also here is his book. I cite him heavily in my manuscript. So I think he does a lot of trainings. His trainings are very expensive. They're out of Sacramento, and particularly he is really more group focused, but I think a lot of his things translate. So thank you again so much. I know I went 5 minutes over. Matt, I know you might want to go to another session, so I want to let you out of here. But if you have any comments or things that you wanted to share at the end, or okay. Okay. Okay, awesome. So I'm just going to give you my email address here. I actually am a person that responds to all emails. So if you email me, I love to collaborate. I will respond. I'm not just saying that. So I'm happy to share my slides, my pre-draft manuscript, as long as you don't give it to other folks, and any tools that I've given. Thank you so much for coming today, and it's been a pleasure. We'll see you next time.